I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Chi Kim, and I am the CEO of Pure Edge Inc. And I'm so very excited to welcome you today for our Lunch and Learn for our Start with the Heart series. And we have a special guest today, Secretary John King. I'm going to invite him to join us. Um, it's so good to see you. Secretary King, I just want to say thank you. One, I know you are incredibly busy. You've been on TV a lot lately, so I just been traveling and running the largest public university system in the country, SUNY, and just to have you be with us for just a short amount of time, just so very grateful. And I think that what I'd like to do is just have you share a little bit, just as you are thinking about our conversation. I read the book, and I know just having the a lot of feelings, a lot of your personal information sort of out for the world to feel. What led you to think about your career, but what led you to actually write the book? And then we're going to get into some details.
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me to this conversation and looking forward to it. Uh, I think for me, it's so clear that teachers made my whole life possible.
Mhm.
The role that teachers played in my life as a kid, the role that teachers have played throughout my career in education, and teachers don't hear thank you very often, or not nearly often enough. And as I thought about writing this book, it was really an opportunity to say thank you to the people who'd made such a huge difference for me, and hopefully to inspire people to think more about what we should be doing as a country to support our teachers, to celebrate teachers. And, hopefully there'll be some students who read it and decide teaching is for them, or maybe there'll be some struggling teachers who are struggling through first year of teaching, which is really hard, and they'll read it and it will give them the kind of energy and a little extra encouragement to keep going.
Yeah, well, it's fun. When I was reading the book, and we've known each other for a few years, and just sort of seeing the arc of your entire life sort of unfold in the book. And I know that, you've gone through so much in terms of having like just personal tragedies and also in your family, and then just kind of going through and navigating. I'd love to just have this conversation sort of be the arc of the book, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, and really being able to ask, if you could just share with our viewers just what was it like? Just share a little bit about your childhood. Uh,
Mhm.
Maybe start there.
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn in New York City. Both my parents were New York City public school educators. My dad was African American, my mom was Puerto Rican. And in my early years, school was very important to our family. My parents both haven't been educators. My mom actually worked as a guidance counselor in the school where I went to elementary school. So school was very central, but it took on an even larger role um, when my mom passed when I was 8, October of fourth grade. And my mom had really been the primary caregiver in the family. My father was much older, um, and so there's really no words to describe what it was like to lose my mom. Uh, it was just my whole world crumbling. And then living with my father, it's just the two of us. And my father had Alzheimer's, and it got progressively worse over the time that was just the two of us. And I didn't know. I didn't have
Yeah.
uh, language really to describe what was going on with him, but he was very unpredictable. So from one night to the next, I didn't know, was he going to talk to me? Was he going to be sad, angry, even violent? And that environment of incredible instability at home
Yeah.
uh, was incredibly difficult. And the thing that allowed me to survive really was school, because school was the place that was safe and supportive and nurturing. And it was the place where um, I could get engaged and feel a sense of love and purpose. And I was very blessed to have teachers at PS 276 in Canarsie and Mark Twain Junior High School in Coney Island who created these joyful learning spaces so that when I was at school, I could be a kid when I couldn't be a kid at home. And as my father got more and more sick, and I ended up figuring out how to get food in our house, figuring out how to just keep our household going, it was teachers who gave me a reason to be hopeful. Uh,
Yeah.
and then, I would also say that they didn't know, right? They didn't know all the things that were going on, but they created that space because they knew that was the right thing to do for kids.
It's just, I mean, reading that whole arc of the story of you being so it's so chaotic at home, and then you going in and just, doing plays and having these amazing, learning experiences with your teachers. There was something, because I taught, I don't know if you know that, but I taught for 9 years. I was a fifth and sixth grade teacher and an administrator in Inglewood. And as you were describing all the things that your teachers did, it sort of it made me think of my mentor, Mrs. Thompson, who just set up these conditions, right? And throughout, and just imagining you, like sort of in all your glory right now, and all the things that you do, your titles and your things, but really just imagining you as a child and being so loved up in school because they knew that you had all this potential, right? You go through that. Was it cathartic or painful or both to write so much detail about the pain that you experienced?
I mean, it's both, right? It's painful and cathartic, right? I mean, in some ways, I, I think partly survived that period by compartmentalizing, right? And being focused in school on school. And so going back and really trying to reconstruct what the day to day was like was very hard.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm still in touch with my teacher from fourth, fifth, sixth grade, Mr. Osterweil. And, as you described, like his classroom was amazing. We read the New York Times every day. We did productions of Midsummer Night's Dream and Alice in Wonderland, the rose with big red felt petals sticking out of my head, right? And we went to the museum and the ballet, and his classroom was just so amazing. And there was something very satisfying knowing that he's going to read this book and
Yeah.
hear, I thanked him many times and, so forth. But I think seeing how I experienced his classroom, hopefully will be something that he uh, appreciates and finds joy in. So that was satisfying.
I can't imagine him not just finding joy in that. Just the way you describe the room, the way you describe the feeling of being in an extraordinary teacher's classroom, what that does for your future trajectory. Like, there's nothing. I mean, he's just gonna. I think that he's gonna love it. I loved it. Just watching and that whole arc. You go through another series. It was sort of the hero's journey, right? I'm like, yes, yes, and then you get to another point in your life, and I think just living, separately after your father passed away, and then kind of going through that next phase of your life. Um, it was hard to read, honestly, just because I could imagine what you were going through. Uh, can you just share a little bit about, what helped you, like as you were writing the book, you're going through the different phases of your life, but what helped you to pinpoint certain kinds of incidents or recollections,
Mm-hmm.
on your writing journey? Because I'm sure there
Yeah.
were probably tons of things to write about, but you have a very clear, distinct path that you choose
Mm.
to write. And I was wondering about those choices as a writer, not just as an educator.
Yeah, yeah. Well, pretty early on, I decided that the kind of structure of the book would be telling the story of these teachers that played a key role in my life at a pivotal moment. And that was a helpful way of sort of organizing the story and also lifting up some teachers who are not uh, traditional teachers in
Yeah.
that sense. So after my dad passed, I moved around different family members, different school. Uh, Living with my brother, who was about 12 years older than me, had no business having a 12-year-old to raise as a 24-year-old. Uh, that was really a struggle. Uh, and school was also playing this important role.
Yeah.
Uh, but I knew I needed to get out of that situation. And through a friend who had from elementary school had gone to boarding school, I
Yeah.
learned about the world of New England boarding schools. And that led me to conclude that going to boarding school would be a way out of the situation with my brother, which was um, very unstable. And I went to Andover, which was incredibly difficult for a whole different set of reasons because
Right.
I was so out of place there, this elite, very wealthy space. As a kid from Brooklyn, there were a lot of gaps. But there were teachers there who I described in the book, like Miss Walker, who was my calculus teacher and spent so much time tutoring me. There were these teachers who um, emerged, and so that really then again became the structure. Even through my professional life, I feel like I've been fortunate to have teachers that I've worked with and mentors that have supported me and have been teachers for me, and that kind of became the cadence of the book, made it easier to figure out where to focus.
Yeah, and speaking of Andover, so there's a little point in there. I don't know if we're going to give away like some big piece, but you might be I don't know, are you the only like sort of sitting secretary that has been expelled from school? Like, I'm not sure.
As far as I know, yes. Uh, um, yeah, I mean, I getting kicked out was really important.
Yeah.
Um, and it, well, one, it was a reflection of how much of a mess I was in high school, right?
Yeah.
And I think that comes through. And as I describe it, just I was angry, angry at adults, in some ways angry at my parents. That may not be rational, but um, just kind of resentful of the chaos that I'd had to go through. Um, I really struggled with adult authority. I also was working through a period of uh, kind of racial identity awareness that caused me to be so much more conscious of some of the structural problems in our society and how those were reflected at Andover. So I was really mad. I was really hostile to following rules. Um, Maybe depressed too.
Yeah.
Um,
Imagine.
and uh, as much as I enjoyed the academics, everything outside of the academics was a struggle. Uh, and getting kicked out, I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, in some ways, uh, I think there were other students doing worse things whose
Yes.
families had more money or more influence and face less accountability. On the
Yep.
other hand, in some ways it was a gift because going to live with my aunt and uncle,
Yeah.
who brought structure into my life for the first time since I was 8,
Oh,
really was transformative and a blessing. And I didn't know it at the time, uh,
right.
but it really it worked out.
It made me think about just being a parent, right? If that had happened to our kids today, what
Yeah,
would we have done?
yeah,
Keep them there, right? All of the ways in which is such an interesting thing. That's what made me think about that when I was reading that. I'm like, oh, I wonder what I would have done. Like, would I have made him like not go back? Would I have done, And I think it's those sort of moments of choice, right?
yeah.
And paths that I just kept reading and just really kind of digging in just internally. It made me do a lot of reflection, honestly, as a teacher. It made me do a lot of reflection as a parent. And as you start to go through now, you're living, in a very stable home. Um, and then your whole new path, but you've had so many traumatic events along the way to get to this stability. Tell me a little bit about the turning point. The other piece I just wanted to make sure that we don't forget to talk about is just uh, you lay out sort of your love life. I just want to name that. And all I can think about is your wife and thinking, what I wonder, the process of writing and doing that. But there's just these really beautiful, sweet moments. But anyways, in any case, just what the turning point was.
Um, uh, one very important turning point was with my uncle. So my uncle had been a Tuskegee Airman, had this extraordinary life where he grew up in a very segregated New York. He went to serve during World War II, had to go to Tuskegee, Alabama, which obviously was incredibly segregated. There was incredible uh, racist hostility towards the Tuskegee Airmen and towards the idea that Black men would be able to fly. Um, he described having to check the fuel tank of the plane to make sure that white officers hadn't poured water in order to cause the planes to crash. So he had the intestinal fortitude, right, to endure that, become a Tuskegee Airman, serve in the military. When he came back to New York, he'd been trained as an accountant, but he couldn't get a job as an accountant because he was Black. And he decided then to become a firefighter, which I just think is amazing, right? That you face this incredible discrimination. Society doesn't respect you or your service or your humanity. And your response to that is, let me go run into burning buildings and save,
Yeah. And serve. Yeah.
right?
And serve. Yeah.
Um, and then he went back into the military, was career Air Force, served in the Pentagon, and then served in a series of sort of public leadership roles, running a hospital, Delaware River Port Authority. At any rate, I had just tremendous respect for him and the life that he had led and his character. And he sat me down after I was kicked out, and he said to me, neither you nor I can do anything about the things that have happened to you. But you have to decide now what kind of man you want to be, what kind of life you want to have. And that was a profoundly important moment of helping me, I want to say move on from being angry, but at least to have perspective
Yeah.
that being angry wasn't really a path forward.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, I mean, that set me on a very different trajectory.
And just imagine, I mean, I'm crying now. I was crying reading it. I'm crying listening to you. I just imagining the kind of impact, one human being, two human beings, like people who just exude, not coddling, honestly. Like, I think nobody coddled you. I mean, that is very clear. But what
Mhm.
they did was just model exactly the kind of, like, sort of high expectations with love.
Yes.
Right. And that's what reminded me of Mrs. Thompson, my mentor in school, is everything that you've described in the book and how you sort of managed to the next phase is that there was just this high expectation with love that you got surrounded by.
Mhm.
And I just, yeah, I mean, I was imagining him being like a, 20-foot tall, like, just, giant of a man, just the way you've described him. So I wanted to thank you for that. I think it's something that you've shared about your own journey and path, about, sort of being angry, maybe, just not knowing why you were in your situation, and then being loved by someone who is just an extraordinary human being and his wife, and really just being able to choose, right?
Mhm.
Really, ultimately, I feel like the book is about choice. Like, what choices can we make to really kind of get to the next? Because you could have easily just stopped, honestly, in some of your endeavors. Um, so I will say this, you are definitely an overachiever, and I love it because every path that you've had. But I think that you could have chosen to stop and like sort of just take this piece, but you didn't. And it kind of leads me to the next part of the book where you are putting yourself in a position of being humbled again. I'm thinking to Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
Free to share just a little bit of that moment as a first year teacher, because I think that's
Yeah.
an important step.
I mean, first year teaching is so hard. People often ask me, like, what's the hardest job you've had? And they expect me to say, Secretary of Education or Commissioner of Education in New York or starting a school. Hardest job by far was first year teaching. It's the hardest professional thing I've ever done
Yeah,
because
100%.
it's so, right? It's so overwhelming.
Yes.
You don't have any files to go back to, right? You have no reference point really. And student teaching is great and helpful, but it's not the same as being the person responsible. Um, and my first year of teaching was in a private school in Puerto Rico, uh, St. John's School. It's in the Condado, near where all the hotels are. Uh, it's a fancy school, it definitely serves um, the children of the elite of the island, both Puerto Rican elite and white Americans from the mainland who've come to live in Puerto Rico. Uh, I was teaching history. There was not a lot of support for a first year teacher. I don't think I ever got feedback from a colleague on teaching. And there was no structure of
Right.
induction support. It was just, here are your textbooks. There's the classroom. Good luck. And uh, I would have my school day and then I would go back. I thought I was going to like explore Puerto Rico and have all these amazing experiences. And really all I did was work. I would go back to my little apartment every night and just plan and plan for the next day. Uh, I came across all of the things that hopefully are better today about teacher prep than they were in the 90s. But like, we didn't talk about classroom management. Turns out that's really important.
Yes.
We didn't talk about assessment and how you uh, really measure student learning. Turns out that's really important. Uh, the thing that helped me was I'd done a lot of public service work in college and understood from that how important the relationship building was. And I really worked at relationship building with my students, and that helps you maybe get a little grace from them as you struggle through first year teaching.
Well, it's interesting to go from that, and then I think you sort of lay out your trajectory of like being in college, working at in the summer, and working at the camp. There's a moment in there where you describe the piñata, like
Okay.
you go from your first year teaching, which is really hard, but there's this chaos with the piñata. All these things that we think that are good things to do with kids, but in the end, I think what you've really done a beautiful job is just laying out having a plan, having structure, knowing the end game. It's not a day to day, but you actually laid out when you started Roxbury Prep an entire year and you made everybody lay out the year. So you knew exactly where you're going, not just on the first day, but really after 180 days of school, what are you really trying to experience? And what was really wonderful to read, John, is just the way you felt in fourth grade. I feel like you created that same kind of element and environment with the field trips and just the experiences and all the sort of embedded learning that just impacted your life so deeply. Can you share with us just a little bit about the trajectory of Roxbury Prep and then sort of this last phase of
Mhm.
your education journey?
Yeah. So, Roxbury Prep, it's a middle school in Boston, high needs community. It's historically African American section of Boston, although also a very large Latino community these days. And what we saw was that in Roxbury, less than 10% of adults had college degrees. And so we wanted to build a school that would put students on a trajectory to be able to succeed in college. And uh, we were very planful. I mean, and we sort of we made a big bet on uh, creating for teachers a kind of ideal, to my mind, a sort of ideal experience of support. So having teachers come for 3.5 weeks in the summer to do planning together, uh, organizing the school week. So we had an extended day. But on Fridays, we would end at the time that the regular Boston Public Schools ended, and we would use that additional time, and and another two and a
Right.
half hours for teacher planning time, meeting in teams, looking at student work together, doing professional development. Uh, we had a, a dual leadership model where one leader was focused on the operational side, and I was focused on the curriculum instruction side. So I was in classrooms continuously in conversation with teachers about their teaching practice. All of that with the goal of creating, and I love how you said that. I mean, for me, it really was about trying to create for kids the kinds of experiences that I had. The structure, right, and consistency, which was present in Mr. Oswald's classroom, but also the joy and the passion and the creativity. And I think about some of the teachers I described, like Mr. Sawicki, our science teacher, who was just this amazing, huge personality
Yeah.
who um, turned his classroom into a cell where you uh, interact with Golgi bodies. It's like the kind of science classroom, almost like Miss Frizzle in
Yes.
a Magic
That
School
school
Bus,
bus.
right?
Yeah.
And but also with high expectations for student learning, for um, uh, how students would treat each other.
Yeah.
And I think over our first 5 years as a school when I was leading, we got better and better at the both the academic rigor piece, but also the culture piece, and figuring out how to make sure that we brought uh, the level of celebration of success and progress that helps make a place joyful. Um, and we became the highest performing urban
Yeah.
school in Massachusetts. We were outperforming the affluent suburban communities, the W's we used to call them, um,
Yeah.
like Wellesley.
Yeah.
Um,
Weston Buzzley.
exactly,
All that.
exactly, exactly. And um, and we also just had these relationships with kids that were amazing, and I think kids felt
Yeah.
cared about by the adults in the school in a way that helped unlock their best selves. So it was an incredible experience, and the community amongst teachers was amazing
Yeah.
too.
It sounded like it. And I feel like it's interesting the way that you interview the folks who you actually, hired to be a part of your network. You go from Roxbury Prep, you've got law school, doctorate, all sort of layered in that time period. And then you go to Uncommon. Now you have a whole big network. And one of the things that I just, wanted to ask about is, folks thinking about choice, right? It's the conversation right
Mm,
now, policy.
mm, mm, mm.
And there's a love-hate relationship with choice, I think, in a lot of places, right? And so knowing that it's a publicly funded school, it's available to all kids around in the charter network that you started and worked with and worked for. Can you just sort of, let's demystify that. I think it's an important conversation for you, especially because you've lived it, you've sort of done policy in it. But then we see these other conversations that are around, for vouchers and other things that are happening across the country. But I would love for just the choice aspect of it, what that
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, the way I think about it is uh, charters were created to create a public school options. They are public schools. They're publicly accountable. They are, um, in the case certainly of Massachusetts and New York, open to all through a lottery system.
Yeah.
But the idea is they're freed from some of the bureaucratic constraints with the condition that they're going to deliver outcome.
Right.
And that sort of blend of autonomy and accountability is a different governance model, but
Right.
still public schools with a public mission. I, I distinguish that kind of choice, which I'm supportive of, again, with the right accountability. And let's acknowledge there are some states that have terrible charter laws
Right.
that do
Yes.
not have real accountability, and that is a problem. But in a system like Massachusetts, New York, where you have that real accountability, I think charters can be a laboratory for innovation. They can be a place that creates opportunities um, that otherwise don't exist within the district. Dual language, arts, schools serving students with autism, a lot of options.
Yeah.
I distinguish that kind of choice from vouchers, which I think ultimately undermine public education. They are not publicly accountable. The private schools that participate in voucher programs in most states are not required to be open to all.
Right.
And uh, that feels very different to me and much less consistent with the role I think public schools play in our democracy.
Yes.
Um, and the other thing, if you look now at many of the states that are doing these policies, the vouchers are not going to the low income
Right.
typical mom who's trying to get her kid through the local Catholic school. They're going to affluent parents whose kids were already in private schools. So they sort of use the marketing around social justice when in fact what they're doing is steering money away from the public sector into the private sector. Um,
And
yeah.
when you talk about, so I think we're kind of now we're going to jump, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
from teaching, you've gone through and you've set up your own sort of, trajectory there. Then you become the state commissioner in New York. Uh,
Hmm.
and from that, you go into the Department of Ed.
Hmm.
And so the Secretary of Education right now, I mean, that's a big, and the Department of Ed is a big hot topic. I think
Yeah.
we've been on multiple national news stations across the country at this point in time, just talking about that. What you just described about vouchers and things, not just the controversial things, but what is the Department of Ed supposed to be and
Yeah.
supposed, I want to just start there, what it was intended to do.
Hmm.
And then we'll maybe, and if anyone has questions, you can certainly put it in the Q&A and we'll have just a short little time to answer any questions that you might have. But
Yeah, I mean, I would think about the department's work in sort of four buckets, right? One is funds that go to serve vulnerable K-12 students. Title I that goes to low-income schools, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding that pays for services for students with disabilities. Title III that goes to English learners. This is a federal commitment to supplement the resources at the local and state level for the students who are most vulnerable. I'm very worried about that funding. If that funding goes away, you're talking about larger class sizes, laid off teachers, fewer advanced placement classes in high needs communities. It will be bad. Second category, hugely important, certainly for my current work, is the federal financial aid system. Pell Grants that go to low income students, the student loan program. These are vital to Americans being able to access higher education. If those things break, and we saw this a little bit last year when there were technical challenges with the FAFSA, if
yes,
those things break, it's a disaster for the country. And they've laid off now a lot of people who work on those things at the department. So I'm very anxious about those systems because our higher ed system in the United States is the envy of the world because we create such broad access.
right.
I not want to see that undermined. Third area of work, and this really is the history of the federal role in education, is around civil rights enforcement. Um, the department was created in 1979, but the federal expanded role in education really came with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 and the Higher Education Act of 1965. These were civil rights laws. And why a federal role? Well, because states and districts don't always do right by kids. I often point people to the example of the Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges integrating schools in New Orleans, integrating an elementary school in New Orleans. And if you think back to that painting, there's little ruby bridges in the center, but walking next to her are US Marshals. Why
Right.
US Marshals? Because the federal government had to intervene to make sure her civil rights were protected. Last year, the department got over 20,000 complaints about civil rights violations. A significant percentage of those from parents of students with disabilities whose kids were not getting the services to which they are entitled. Without the department, who will do that work?
Right.
And then the fourth area, and this is maybe wonky, but important, data,
Yeah.
like the NAEP, so we know how states are doing, right? Yeah, you and I work on science of reading issues together. We know that Mississippi is a place that has made a lot of progress because of their work on science of reading. We know that because of the NAEP, because we have this National Assessment of Educational Progress that helps us look at the country and know how we're doing. The people who work on those kinds of things, data, transparency, accountability, also laid off at the department. What will happen to that infrastructure?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like when I think about your journey, the conversation we're having right now about these four sort of, buckets of work at the department, and what it took to get you to the Department of Ed, and just your impact. Um, Honestly, I feel like it's overwhelming for me to think about you as a small child going through all these moments, but at the same time, what an incredible story of resilience and just fortitude, and what love, and really just um what love and sort of the high expectations can do for you. I don't want to end this conversation just on this Department of Ed, because I feel like there's all that sort of hanging out and it's still there. What I'd love to talk about really before we start to close out with questions is just really the trajectory of you meeting your wife. I feel like
Mm,
there's a whole hopefulness and path, because I don't want this to be like all dark and
yeah,
but just the story and the unveiling and the proposal, I just want everyone to know that it's in the book and it's so sweet. And but I want to share that because I feel like we need to leave also a little bit of moments of, all the hopefulness and the joy that you have in the book too. And that one
yeah,
in particular, I think just made my heart so happy.
yeah. Well, and you've met Melissa. I mean, if not for Melissa, I couldn't have done the things that I've done in my career. Just to be clear, she's been an incredible partner in my professional journey, and we have two amazing daughters. And uh, so we met through another teacher. So Melissa was teaching first grade in Harlem, Family Academy. Um, and she had gone to college with my friend Teresa Rodriguez, who taught with me at a high school in Boston. And one day, Teresa comes to my classroom and she says, I have the perfect person for you. And she tells me about Melissa, and she says she's going to introduce us so that I can get Melissa to help. Because at that point, I knew I was starting Roxbury Prep, get Melissa to help me with outreach to potential teacher candidates. So she introduced us on email. And, this was before a lot of the current technology tools. Um, and so we were corresponding on email for, a couple months really. And, it was that kind of conversation where you like mostly you're talking about kind of work, but then you slip in a question and then you have a little personal exchange. And I spent a lot of time on those emails, making sure they were well crafted. And then we decided to meet on a blind date. So now I had seen her picture because she had been a graduation speaker at her in her teacher training program. So
Yeah.
so it wasn't totally blind date, but I went to meet her in New York City in Lower Manhattan. We were going to go out to dinner, and uh, she's beautiful. And as she walked up, I thought, wow, I'm really out of my league. This is really not gonna work out for me. But what the heck?
It did work out.
Unfortunately, it did work out. Um, and I think it's interesting. We knew pretty early on that this was special. It was really our second date when I came down from Boston to New York. Uh, and we had a conversation about like, well, is this a thing we want to do? Because long distance is hard. And um, so I think we both knew very early that this had a lot of potential. And um,
I think, John, I'm just going to name it for you. A woman who's going to go on school field trips with you, with middle schoolers. I think that was probably my favorite moment. Cruise. So
yeah.
you'll have to, I'm just going to flash this. It's called Teacher by
Yeah,
Teacher. It's by John. And every one of you is going to get a free copy of this book for joining us today. So I just want to name that. I won't give away how he proposed because I feel like that's really important for you to just know. But I just think, John, the book itself, it was such a wonderful moment for me to read. I think just knowing you personally and kind of seeing your journey, that must have been scary to put so much of your personal life on paper. Um, but I want you to know, just from a reader standpoint, completely just objectively, I think that you're going to inspire a lot of people, either to become a teacher, to write thank you notes for a teacher, to remember all the wonderful human beings that actually lead us to here. And that also when things are hard, it's not the end, right? It's sort of beginning. And I think that's what you really laid out is when things are really hard, you actually began again and again and again, but in a way that is just sort of built. And I think that's what resilience actually does. You have all the components of resilience in your book, right?
thank you.
Just the habits and really the hopefulness and the joy, I think is really important, especially in these times. So I wanted to thank you personally just for allowing me to get an advance copy and for just joining us here. And I just know it's going to make a huge impact on so many people. So
Thank you.
I'm going to open up. There's a question here, John. It says, tell us about how you funded your education through scholarship, or did you pay for your doctoral degree through your own out-of-pocket resources?
Oh, that's a good question. So, um, my parents have both spent their careers in New York City public schools. When they passed, there was, pension money, those kinds of things, and that certainly helped with college costs, um, along with whatever institutional support. And then I um, was very fortunate to get a Truman Scholarship, which is this national scholarship for folks who want to pursue careers in public service, and James Madison Memorial Fellowship, which is also a national scholarship. Both of these are funded by the federal government as investments in living memorials to these presidents. So the Truman Scholarship around public service, and the Madison Memorial Fellowship is for teachers of secondary social studies who want to teach about American history and the history of the Constitution. And so I was fortunate to win both when I was college senior, and that helped to pay for graduate school along with loans that I was still paying when I was U.S. Secretary of Education. But it made me very appreciative of the student loan system. It makes higher ed possible for so many. It also made me appreciative of the psychological burden of having that student debt. Yeah, and it wasn't until after I'd been secretary that I finally got to the end of paying for school.
Which is also an amazing story. I think right now I know that you have a busy day. You're going to be traveling a little bit for your work. I know just for folks who don't know that you're also now the chancellor at SUNY, so running a very, very large system as well. So we just appreciate you taking the time and being with us today, Secretary King. And I want everyone to know when you close out when we end the webinar, you're going to get a survey with your name and your correct mailing address, and we will get you a copy of the book just for joining us today. So again, we just are so grateful. John, this is a great book. I'm so excited. I can't wait for others to read it and share it out. And thank you so much for just sharing your heart and your knowledge with us. I just really appreciate it.
Thank you. I feel very fortunate about all the projects that you and I have gotten to do together, and look forward to more, and hope people enjoy the book.
Yes, I think so too. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. We're going to
Thank
be
you.
signing off. Bye.
Take care.